Have you ever noticed how the people who should celebrate your success the most sometimes seem the most uncomfortable with it? You know that feeling when you share good news with family, and instead of joy, you're met with subtle criticism or dismissive comments that leave you questioning whether you should have shared at all. It's that sharp sting when your brother jokes about your promotion being lucky, or your sister rolls her eyes at your new home. The very people who share your blood, your history, your childhood memories, somehow become the ones who make you feel smallest. This isn't about them being bad people. It's about something deeper, more primal, that lives in the shadows of family dynamics. And if you felt this, you're not imagining it, and you're certainly not alone. Family envy is perhaps the most painful form of jealousy because it strikes where we're most vulnerable, in the place we expect unconditional love. Unlike workplace, rivalry, or social competition, family envy carries the weight of shared history, unspoken expectations, and deep-rooted comparisons that started before you could even walk. It hides behind jokes that aren't really funny, advice that feels more like criticism, and support that comes with conditions. The brother who reminds you that he's older every time you succeed, the parent who can't help but mention what you're still lacking, the cousin who turns every gathering into a competition you never signed up for. These patterns repeat themselves in millions of homes, creating invisible wounds that shape how we see ourselves and limit how much joy we allow ourselves to feel. The cost of family envy extends far beyond hurt feelings. It can fundamentally alter the trajectory of your life. When those closest to you respond to your growth with resistance rather than celebration, you might find yourself dimming your light, downplaying achievements, or even sabotaging opportunities to avoid their discomfort. You learn to make yourself smaller to fit into the box they've created for you, trading your potential for a false peace that never quite settles the underlying tension. Many people spend decades managing family dynamics by hiding their successes, avoiding certain topics, or accepting criticism as the price of belonging. But what if there was another way? What if you could protect your peace, preserve your relationships, where possible, and still honor your own growth without apology? The truth is, you can't change how your family members feel about your success. Their envy springs from their own unhealed wounds and unmet dreams. But you can absolutely change how you respond to it, how much access you give to your emotional landscape, and how you build boundaries that protect your well-being without severing important ties. This isn't about cutting people off or creating conflict. It's about developing sophisticated strategies that allow you to navigate family dynamics with wisdom and grace. It's about learning to love them while also loving yourself enough to not let their limitations become yours. The ancient Stoics understood that we cannot control others' emotions or reactions, but we have complete sovereignty over our own responses. And that's where your power lies. Today, you'll discover 9 powerful ways to protect yourself from family envy, drawn from real stories of people who transformed their family dynamics without losing themselves in the process. You'll learn how to create emotional distance without creating actual distance, how to redirect conversations that turn toxic, and how to build a support system that celebrates rather than tolerates your success. These aren't just theories or wishful thinking. They're practical strategies that have helped thousands reclaim their right to thrive. By the end of this video, you'll have a clear roadmap for maintaining your integrity and joy, even when surrounded by those who struggle to celebrate with you. If this resonates with you already, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, because understanding these dynamics might just change everything about how you show up in your own life. To illustrate this, let me tell you a story. In a small family-run restaurant nestled between a bakery and a flower shop, Harper Lane stood before the kitchen's stainless steel counter, her chef's whites still crisp despite the lunch rush that had just ended. At 28, she had just received news that would change everything. The owners, her own parents, had chosen her to lead the kitchen as head chef. The weight of 3 generations of family recipes seemed to press down on her shoulders as she heard her brother Axel's voice from the dining room, his laughter carrying an edge she knew too well. "Can you believe it?" Axel said to someone, his voice just loud enough to carry. "My little sister playing with her fusion nonsense, and they give her the whole kitchen." Harper's fingers traced the edge of the counter as she processed what had just happened. The promotion she'd worked toward for years, the recognition of her talent and dedication, had been reduced to fusion nonsense in her brother's eyes. She watched through the service window as Axel continued his performance for their mother Sylvia, who sat at her usual corner table, nodding along with a troubled expression. "I've been here 5 years longer," Axel continued, his voice rising slightly. "I know every recipe by heart, but apparently that doesn't matter when you're adding truffle oil to Grandma's marinara." Sylvia Lane looked up from her coffee, her weathered hands wrapped around the ceramic mug their father had made decades ago. "Well, Harper is still learning," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of maternal diplomacy that somehow made things worse. "Maybe this will help her understand that our customers come here for tradition, not experiments. She'll figure it out." The words hung in the air like smoke from the kitchen, and Harper felt the familiar sting of being diminished even in her moment of triumph. The next morning arrived with its usual bustle of prep work, but everything felt different. Harper stood before her team, her new title feeling both heavy and fragile, as she outlined the day's specials, including a subtle incorporation of local microgreens into their classic Caesar salad. She caught Axel's eye roll from across the kitchen. "Microgreens," he muttered to the line cook beside him. "Next, she'll be serving foam instead of sauce." The line cook shifted uncomfortably, caught between loyalties, and Harper realized this was how it would be now. Every decision questioned, every innovation mocked, every success attributed to luck or favoritism rather than skill. That evening, after service, Harper sat alone in the office, staring at the month's numbers. Despite Axel's resistance and her mother's doubts, her fusion nonsense had increased sales by 15%. Customers were coming from neighboring towns specifically to try her weekend specials. Food bloggers had started featuring them. Yet, when she'd mentioned this at the family meeting earlier, Sylvia had simply said, "Trends come and go, dear. Don't let it go to your head." Axel had added, "Remember when that place downtown started doing deconstructed pizzas? They're closed now." Neither acknowledged that Harper's changes were thoughtful evolutions of their classics, not gimmicks. It was during a particularly tense Tuesday service that Harper realized something had to change. Axel had openly contradicted her plating instructions in front of the entire kitchen staff, insisting that the old way was better. When she'd pulled him aside afterward, he'd sneered, "Just because Mom and Dad felt sorry for you doesn't mean you know better than me." The words cut deep, but they also crystallized something for Harper. This wasn't about the food or the restaurant. This was about Axel's wounded pride and her mother's fear of change. She couldn't fix their feelings, but she could protect herself from their poison. The first step Harper took was the hardest: emotional detachment. She began to see her family's comments not as truths about her abilities, but as expressions of their own fears and insecurities. When Axel called her menu "changes pretentious," she heard the subtext, "I'm afraid I'm being left behind." When Sylvia warned against getting too fancy, Harper understood it as, "I'm scared the restaurant I know will disappear." This shift in perspective didn't make the comments less hurtful, but it made them less powerful. She started responding with calm acknowledgement rather than defense. "I hear your concern," became her refrain, followed by continuing with her plans anyway. The second boundary Harper established was professional. She instituted formal menu meetings with written proposals and data-driven presentations. No more casual dismissals over family dinner. When Axel wanted to challenge a dish, he had to do it in the meeting with specific feedback rather than general mockery. "If you have concerns about the truffle oil," she'd say calmly, "please present them at Thursday's meeting with your alternative suggestion and cost analysis." Sylvia's vague warnings about tradition were met with customer feedback forms and sales reports. The formality felt strange in a family business, but it created a buffer between Harper's professional decisions and her family's emotional reactions. But perhaps the most transformative step was when Harper joined a local chefs collective. Every other week, she'd meet with other restaurant professionals who understood both the challenges of the industry and the unique pressure of family businesses. In that conference room at the community center, surrounded by peers who celebrated innovation rather than feared it, Harper found her voice again. They shared techniques, encouraged experimentation, and most importantly, reminded her that her creativity wasn't a betrayal of tradition, but an honoring of it through evolution. "The best family restaurants," one chef told her, "are the ones that respect the past while embracing the future." The collective became more than professional support. It became Harper's emotional anchor. When she presented her new autumn menu concept to the group, featuring elevated versions of her grandmother's recipes with seasonal local ingredients, they responded with enthusiasm and constructive feedback. No eye rolls, no comments about her age or gender, no reminders of how things had always been done. They saw her as Chef Harper, not anyone's little sister or daughter. This external validation didn't replace her family's approval, but it made their disapproval less devastating. As weeks turned to months, Harper noticed a shift in the restaurant's atmosphere. The younger staff members, inspired by her leadership, began contributing their own ideas. Regular customers started bringing friends specifically to try the weekend specials. Food critics wrote glowing reviews that focused not on abandoning tradition, but on thoughtful evolution and respectful innovation. Even some of the old-timers admitted grudgingly that the microgreens weren't bad. But more importantly, Harper noticed a shift in herself. She no longer braced for impact when entering the kitchen, no longer felt the need to justify every decision. The turning point came during the restaurant's anniversary celebration. Harper had created a special menu that paired classic dishes with modern interpretations. Her grandmother's famous ragu, alongside her own version featuring locally sourced lamb and fresh herbs. As she watched diners savoring both versions, she felt Axel approach. "The lamb thing is actually good," he said quietly, the admission clearly costing him something. It wasn't an apology or a full acceptance, but it was a crack in the wall he'd built. Harper simply nodded, understanding that this was as much as he could give right now. Sylvia's evolution was even more gradual. She began telling customers that Harper was experimenting with some new things instead of still learning. When a food magazine wanted to do a feature on the restaurant, focusing on how Harper was bringing new life to family traditions, Sylvia agreed to be interviewed. Though she still emphasized the importance of their classic menu, she admitted that Harper has brought in some younger customers we might have lost otherwise. These small acknowledgements felt like major victories, not because Harper needed their approval anymore, but because they represented a family slowly learning to make space for growth. The most profound change, however, was in how Harper saw herself. She no longer felt like she was betraying her family by succeeding, or that she had to choose between innovation and tradition. The emotional boundaries she'd established allowed her to love her family without being limited by their fears. The professional structure she'd implemented protected her creative vision while still respecting their input. And the external support system she'd cultivated reminded her that her worth as a chef existed independently of her family's recognition. Looking back, Harper understood that protecting herself from her family's envy hadn't meant cutting them off or proving them wrong. It had meant recognizing that their resistance came from their own struggles with change and identity. Axel, 5 years older and raised with different expectations, had built his identity around being the heir apparent. Sylvia, carrying the weight of 3 generations of tradition, feared that change meant erasure. Their envy wasn't really about Harper. It was about their own fears of being left behind or forgotten. The strategies Harper employed, emotional detachment, professional boundaries, and external support, weren't shields against her family, but bridges toward a healthier dynamic. By refusing to absorb their negativity while still acknowledging their concerns, she created space for everyone to grow. By formalizing professional interactions while maintaining personal warmth, she separated her role as chef from her role as daughter and sister. By finding validation outside the family system, she broke the cycle of seeking approval from those not equipped to give it. As I reflect on Harper's journey, I see patterns that emerge in so many family dynamics where envy takes root. The successful family member becomes a mirror for others' unfulfilled dreams or a symbol of paths not taken. The achievement that should unite becomes the wedge that divides. But Harper's story shows us that we don't have to be victims of our family's emotional limitations. We can love them and lead our own lives. We can honor tradition while embracing innovation. We can maintain relationships while maintaining boundaries. The 3 strategies Harper employed form a powerful framework for anyone facing family envy. First, emotional detachment allows you to see family criticism as information about their internal state, rather than truth about your worth. Second, professional or formal boundaries create necessary structure in relationships that might otherwise be too enmeshed. Third, external support systems provide the validation and perspective that family members caught in their own struggles cannot offer. These aren't just coping mechanisms. They're tools for transformation, both for yourself and potentially for the family dynamic itself. What strikes me most about Harper's approach is how it preserved the possibility of relationship while protecting her personal growth. She didn't write off Axel or Sylvia as toxic people to be avoided. She recognized them as complex individuals struggling with change, and she found ways to continue moving forward without requiring their permission or approval. This nuanced approach, firm boundaries with open hearts, represents the kind of emotional maturity that turns family challenges into opportunities for deeper understanding. If Harper's story resonates with you, or if you've found your own ways to navigate family envy, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more insights on protecting your peace while preserving important relationships. To make this clearer, listen to this other story. Samuel Reed stood in the doorway of his new home, keys still cool in his palm, watching the afternoon light stream through windows that were finally his. At 35, after years of careful saving and freelance projects that stretched into late nights, he'd done it, bought a house in a quiet suburban neighborhood where he could finally breathe. The moving truck had just pulled away, leaving him with boxes to unpack and a sense of accomplishment he'd never quite felt before. Then his phone buzzed. "Heard you bought a place?" His cousin Brendan's text read. "Must be nice, some of us are still trying to make rent." The next weekend, Brendan showed up unannounced, as Samuel somehow knew he would. "Thought I'd check out your mansion," Brendan said, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. He walked through the modest 3-bedroom house with the air of an inspector finding faults. "Graphic design must pay better than I thought," he commented, running his hand along the kitchen counter. "Sitting at home, drawing pictures all day, while the rest of us are out there actually working." The words stung exactly as they were meant. 2. reducing Samuel's years of building a client base and perfecting his craft to child's play. Their mothers had always compared the cousins. Lorraine Reed, Samuel's mother, arrived an hour after Brendan carrying a casserole and commentary. "It's a nice starter home," she said, emphasis on starter clear. "Of course, Brendan's looking at properties too. He just needs the market to stabilize. It's harder for people with real jobs, with regular hours. They can't just take on extra projects whenever they want." She settled into Samuel's new couch as if she'd been the one to pay for it, already rewriting the narrative of his success into something smaller, something that highlighted Brendan's struggles rather than Samuel's achievements. The pattern established itself quickly. Brendan would drop by at least twice a week, always without calling, often during Samuel's work hours. "Must be nice to make your own schedule," he'd say, helping himself to whatever was in the refrigerator. "While you're here playing with your computer, I'm out there dealing with real people, real problems." He'd lounge on the couch while Samuel tried to work, making just enough noise to be disruptive, just enough comments to be undermining. "That logo looks like something my kid could make," he'd offer. "Or how much are they paying you for that? Seems like a lot for some shapes and colors." Lorraine's visits were equally draining, but differently weaponized. She'd arrive with groceries Samuel hadn't asked for, and stories about Brendan's latest job interview or unfair situation. "Poor Brendan," she'd sigh, reorganizing Samuel's kitchen to her liking. "He works so hard, but the economy is just terrible for people in traditional fields. Not everyone can hide behind a computer screen." She'd look around the house Samuel had worked so hard for and find ways to diminish it. The neighborhood's okay, I suppose. Brendan's looking at better areas once he gets back on his feet. He's always had champagne taste, that one. Samuel found himself dreading the sound of cars in his driveway, the doorbell that announced another invasion of his space. His home office, meant to be a sanctuary of creativity and productivity, became a stage for Brendan's bitter performances. His living room, where he'd imagined hosting friends and unwinding after long days, became Lorraine's platform for passive-aggressive comparisons. The house he'd bought to finally have his own space was becoming just another venue for his family's long-running production of Why Samuel Doesn't Deserve His Success. One particularly bad Thursday, Samuel realized something had to change. Brendan had shown up during a crucial client call, ringing the doorbell repeatedly and then using the spare key Samuel had naively given him for emergencies. He'd barged into the office, seen Samuel on a video call, and loudly commented, "Oh, playing businessman again." The client had heard everything. After salvaging the call and watching Brendan rifle through his refrigerator like he owned it, Samuel understood that boundaries weren't just helpful, they were essential for survival. The first boundary Samuel set was physical, limiting access to private spaces. He changed his locks and didn't give anyone a spare key. When Brendan showed up unannounced the following week, Samuel met him at the door. "I'm working," he said simply. "We need to schedule visits in advance." Brendan's face darkened. "Schedule? I'm family, not a client." But Samuel held firm. "Which is why I want to give you my full attention when you visit. Let's plan something. For the weekend." The door closed on Brendan's shocked expression, and Samuel returned to his office, heart pounding but spirit lightening. His mother was harder to manage, arriving with guilt as her primary weapon. "I can't believe you changed." "The locks without telling me," Lorraine said when her key didn't work. "What if there's an emergency?" Samuel had prepared for this. "If there's an emergency, you can call me, but for regular visits I need advance notice. I work from home, remember?" She clutched her casserole dish like a shield. "I never thought I'd need an appointment to see my own son." But Samuel recognized the manipulation and didn't bite. "It's not an appointment, Mom. It's just common courtesy." The second strategy Samuel developed was mastering the art of redirecting conversations. When Brendan inevitably steered discussions toward money or career comparisons, Samuel became skilled at changing course. "How's your daughter doing in school?" he'd ask. Or did you catch the game last night? When Lorraine launched into her usual lamentations about Brendan's struggles, Samuel would shift to asking about her garden or her book club. It felt mechanical at first, like learning a new language, but gradually it became second nature. He couldn't control their envy, but he could control how much airtime it got in his presence. The real transformation came with Samuel's third decision: building a chosen family. He started by getting to know his neighbors, people who had no history with his family dynamics, and saw him simply as Samuel, the friendly graphic designer who helped design flyers for the neighborhood watch. He joined a local hiking group where success was measured in miles climbed, not salaries earned. He became a regular at a coffee shop where other freelancers worked, creating an informal co-working community where everyone understood the challenges and rewards of self-employment without judgment or comparison. These new relationships provided what his family couldn't: uncomplicated support and genuine celebration of his achievements. When he landed a major contract with a tech startup, his hiking buddies organized a celebratory barbecue. When he shared his work at the coffee shop, fellow freelancers offered constructive feedback and referrals, not bitter commentary. His neighbor, an older woman named Patricia, became an unexpected mentor, sharing wisdom about maintaining family relationships while protecting personal boundaries. "Family is important," she told him, "but it shouldn't cost you your peace." The shift in dynamics became evident during holiday gatherings. Samuel now met family at restaurants or neutral locations, maintaining control over the length and nature of interactions. When Brendan started his usual routine about easy money and playing on computers, Samuel simply smiled and changed the subject. When Lorraine began her comparison dance, Samuel would acknowledge her concern for Brendan without accepting the implicit criticism of his own choices. "I hope things improve for Brendan," he'd say, then pivot to asking about her upcoming vacation plans. Brendan's resentment initially intensified as his access diminished. "You think you're too good for us now," he accused during one scheduled visit, "living in your fancy house, hanging out with your new friends." Samuel had learned not to defend or justify. "I value our relationship," he said calmly, "which is why I want our time together to be positive. If you can't be happy for my success, that's okay, but I won't apologize for it either." The honesty seemed to shock Brendan into temporary silence, and while he didn't suddenly become supportive, these actively undermining comments decreased. Lorraine's adjustment was more subtle, but equally significant. Deprived of unfettered access to Samuel's space and constant opportunities for comparison, she began to actually see her son rather than just the symbol of Brendan's perceived failures. During one lunch at a local cafe, she surprised Samuel by asking about his work with genuine interest. "I don't really understand what you do," she admitted, "but you seem happy." It wasn't a ringing endorsement, but it was progress, an acknowledgement that his path, though different from what she'd imagined, had value. The house that had once felt like a battlefield became what Samuel had always envisioned, a sanctuary. His office hummed with creative energy, free from unexpected interruptions and cutting remarks. His living room hosted game nights with his new friends, people who celebrated each other's wins without keeping score. The spare bedroom he'd worried about defending from family criticism became a space for visiting clients, its walls decorated with projects that filled him with pride rather than defensiveness. Samuel's story illuminates different but equally important strategies for protecting against family envy. Where Harper needed emotional detachment within a shared workspace, Samuel needed physical boundaries to protect his personal space. Where Harper formalized professional interactions, Samuel limited access and controlled the venues for family contact. Both found salvation in external support systems, but Samuel's chosen family became not just professional validation, but his primary source of personal connection and celebration. The beauty of Samuel's approach lay in its clarity. He didn't try to change Brendan's bitterness or convince his mother to stop comparing them. He simply decided what he would and wouldn't allow in his own space and life. The boundaries weren't walls meant to punish, but rather gates meant to preserve relationships by preventing resentment from poisoning every interaction. By meeting family in neutral spaces and limiting the duration of visits, he could maintain connection without sacrificing his peace. Most importantly, Samuel learned that protecting himself from family envy didn't mean he loved them less. It meant he loved himself enough to not let their limitations define his life. The chosen family he built didn't replace his biological family, but provided the support and celebration they couldn't offer. His new community saw his success as inspiration rather than threat, his happiness as something to share rather than resent. In creating this parallel support system, Samuel found the strength to engage with his family from a place of security rather than seeking validation they weren't equipped to provide. Reflecting on both Harper and Samuel's journeys, we see that family envy often stems from proximity without perspective. When we're too close to family members' daily struggles and disappointments, our successes can feel like spotlights on their perceived failures. But by creating appropriate distance, emotional in Harper's case, physical in Samuel's, we allow space for healthier dynamics to potentially emerge. The boundaries we set aren't rejections, but invitations for better relationships, ones based on mutual respect rather than forced intimacy that breeds resentment. I want to tell you another story that captures this perfectly. Evelyn Hart sat in the university library, surrounded by philosophy texts that would have been incomprehensible to her just 2 years ago. At 22, she was living a life she'd once only dreamed about, analyzing Kant and Nietzsche, writing papers that her professors called insightful, walking across a campus that felt like another world from the small town where she'd grown up. Her phone vibrated with a text from her sister Lila. "Must be nice to sit around thinking all day while some of us work for a living." The words stung, as they always did, reducing her academic pursuits to privileged idleness. The divide between the sisters had started the day Evelyn received her acceptance letter. Lila, just 2 years younger but seemingly decades apart in worldview, had watched with narrowed eyes as their parents scraped together money for textbooks and dormitory fees. "I could go to college too," Lila had said then, though she'd never shown interest before. "I just choose to stay here and help with real life." The real life was her job at the local grocery store and her relationship with her high school boyfriend, both of which she wielded like weapons against Evelyn's choices. Their father, Greg Hart, added his own special brand of undermining disguised as humor. "Here comes the philosopher," he'd announce whenever Evelyn visited home, his calloused mechanic's hands gesturing grandly. "Better watch what we say, folks. She might analyze us." He'd laugh, but there was an edge to it, a suggestion that Evelyn's education was making her judgmental, superior, disconnected from her roots. "Hope they're teaching you something useful up there," he'd add. "Not just how to look down on us regular people." The first holiday break had been the worst. Evelyn had come home excited to share what she was learning, to bridge the gap between her two worlds. Instead, every conversation became a minefield. When she mentioned her ethics class, Lila rolled her eyes. "Ethics? Right. Because you need a class to tell you right from wrong." When she tried to explain her passion for epistemology, Greg interrupted with, "Oh, that's nice, honey, but can it fix a transmission?" Even her mother, usually neutral, would change the subject quickly, as if Evelyn's education was something embarrassing to be glossed over. The family gatherings that had once been comfortable became performances where Evelyn was cast as the villain. Lila would make pointed comments about student loans while flashing her new car keys bought with her grocery store wages. "At least I'm not in debt for the next 20 years. she'd say. Greg would tell the same story about his friend's daughter who got a degree and ended up working retail anyway. $60,000 to fold shirts, he'd conclude, shaking his head while looking directly at Evelyn. The subtext was clear. Evelyn's pursuit of knowledge was both a betrayal and a mistake. What hurt most was how they'd rewritten their shared history. Lila now told people that Evelyn had always thought she was better than everyone else, though Evelyn remembered them as close sisters who shared everything. Greg claimed Evelyn was too good for her old man now, though she still called him twice a week and visited whenever she could. They'd created a narrative where her education was an act of abandonment, her growth a form of rejection. Every achievement, making the dean's list, getting selected for a competitive seminar, earning praise from professors, was seen as further evidence of her supposed superiority complex. During one particularly painful Sunday dinner, Evelyn realized she'd stopped sharing anything meaningful about her life. When asked about school, she gave vague answers. "It's fine." When her aunt inquired about her classes, she mentioned only the most practical ones: statistics, technical writing. She'd learned to make herself smaller, to hide the parts of her life that brought her joy, because sharing them only invited mockery or resentment. She was living a double life: the engaged, passionate student on campus and the diminished, apologetic daughter at home. The breaking point came when Evelyn won a prestigious fellowship for her senior thesis on moral philosophy. It was the kind of opportunity that could open doors to graduate school, to a life of teaching and research she'd barely dared imagine. When she told her family, the silence was deafening. Finally, Lila spoke. "More school. Haven't you had enough of playing dress-up as an intellectual?" Greg added. "When are you going to get a real job and start contributing?" Even her mother just sighed and said, "I hope you know what you're doing." Their inability to celebrate with her felt like a death of something precious. That night, Evelyn sat in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by remnants of who she used to be, and made 3 decisions that would transform her relationship with her family. First, she would reframe their narrative. Instead of accepting their version where her education was abandonment, she'd create her own story where it was evolution. She wasn't leaving them behind. She was expanding what was possible for their family. She couldn't make them see it this way, but she could stop internalizing their version. The second decision was to practice selective disclosure. If sharing her academic life invited pain, she'd share only what felt safe. This wasn't lying or hiding. It was protecting her joy from those who couldn't hold it gently. She'd talk about campus events, her part-time job at the library, the friends she'd made, the peripheral details that didn't trigger their insecurities, the deep conversations about philosophy, the thrill of intellectual discovery, the mentorship from professors who saw her potential. These she'd reserve for those who could celebrate them. The third, and perhaps most crucial decision, was to invest in self-compassion. Evelyn began seeing a counselor at the university's health center, someone who helped her understand that family envy often stems from fear and limitation rather than lack of love. She started a mindfulness practice, learning to sit with the discomfort of being misunderstood without trying to fix it. She sought mentorship from professors who'd also been first-generation college students, who understood the particular grief of outgrowing your family's understanding while still loving them deeply. Dr. Patricia Johnson became more than Evelyn's thesis advisor. She became a model for navigating family complexity. "They love you," Dr. Johnson said during one of their meetings, "but they can only love you from where they stand. Your growth feels like judgment to them because it highlights paths they didn't or couldn't take. This isn't your fault or theirs, it's just heartbreaking." She shared her own story of family members who still didn't understand what she did after 20 years of teaching philosophy, who still asked when she'd get a real job despite her tenure and publications. Evelyn found her tribe in unexpected places. The philosophy club became her chosen family, a group of students who understood the electricity of a good argument, the satisfaction of finally grasping a difficult concept. Her study group turned into deep friendships with people who celebrated, her fellowship with genuine joy, who saw her success as inspiration rather than threat. The elderly woman who worked at the campus coffee shop became an unexpected confidant, someone who'd remind Evelyn that education was a gift, regardless of who understood it. The selective disclosure strategy proved more powerful than Evelyn had imagined. By sharing less about her academic life, she created space for other connections with her family. She and Lila could talk about movies, cooking, their shared memories of childhood. Without the constant friction over college, they found neutral ground. It wasn't the deep sisterhood Evelyn had hoped for, but it was something, a relationship that could exist without constant conflict. With her father, she learned to ask about his work, to show genuine interest in the mechanical problems he solved daily. He couldn't understand her passion for philosophy, but she could appreciate his expertise in his own field. The self-compassion work was ongoing and difficult. There were still moments when family comments cut deep, when she questioned whether her education was worth the growing distance. But her counselor helped her see that the distance had always been there. Education had just made it visible. "You're not creating a gap," the counselor explained. "You're revealing one that existed, and that revelation, painful as it is, allows you to build bridges where possible and boundaries where necessary." Through journaling and meditation, Evelyn learned to hold both truths. She could grieve the family closeness she'd imagined, while also celebrating the life she was building. As graduation approached, Evelyn's relationship with her family had transformed, though not in the way she'd once hoped. She'd stopped trying to make them understand or appreciate her academic journey. Instead, she focused on maintaining whatever connection was possible while protecting her own growth. When Lila made snide comments about professional students, Evelyn would simply smile and change the subject. When Greg joked about philosophers and real work, she'd laugh along without taking it personally. She'd learned that their mockery said nothing about her value and everything about their own fears. The graduation ceremony became a testament to Evelyn's journey. Her family attended, sitting stiffly among other parents who whooped and cheered. They clapped politely when her name was called, when she was recognized for academic excellence. But in the audience were also Dr. Johnson, her philosophy club, friends, the coffee shop lady who'd brought flowers. These people erupted in genuine celebration, understanding what this moment meant, how hard-won it was. Evelyn realized then that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up for your becoming. After the ceremony, at the small reception Evelyn had organized, something unexpected happened. Greg, uncomfortable in his only suit, approached. "Dr. Johnson, I don't understand what she studies," he said quietly, "but you seem to think she's good at it." Dr. Johnson smiled warmly. "Your daughter has one of the finest minds I've encountered in 20 years of teaching. You should be very proud." Greg nodded slowly, and Evelyn saw something shift in his expression. Not full understanding, but perhaps the beginning of acceptance that his daughter's path, though foreign to him, had value. Evelyn's story completes our trilogy of protection, strategies against family envy. Where Harper needed emotional detachment in a shared workspace and Samuel required physical boundaries for his home, Evelyn had to reframe the entire narrative of her life. Her education wasn't abandonment, but expansion. The selective disclosure that might seem like hiding was actually preservation, keeping sacred what others couldn't honor, and the self-compassion work wasn't self-indulgence, but survival, a way to hold her own worth when those closest to her couldn't see it. Each story we've shared today reveals different facets of the same truth. Family envy is often fear dressed up as criticism, limitation masquerading as concern. Harper's brother feared being surpassed, Samuel's cousin resented reminders of his own struggles, and Evelyn's family felt judged by her growth. In each case, the solution wasn't to shrink back to fit their comfort zones, but to expand with wisdom, creating boundaries that preserved both personal growth and family connections where possible. The 9 strategies we've explored: emotional detachment, professional boundaries, external support, limiting access, redirecting conversations, building chosen families, reframing narratives, selective disclosure, and self-compassion aren't just defense mechanisms. They're tools for transformation, ways to alchemize family pain into personal power. They allow us to love our families without being limited by their fears, to maintain connections without sacrificing our growth, to honor where we came from while embracing where we're going. As I reflect on Harper, Samuel, and Evelyn's journeys, I'm struck by their courage. Not the dramatic kind that makes headlines, but the quiet courage of daily choices to protect their own light while not extinguishing anyone else's. If you found wisdom in their stories, if you see your own struggles reflected in theirs, take a moment to like this video and know that you're not alone in navigating these complex family dynamics. As we've journeyed through Harper's kitchen battles, Samuel's home invasion challenges, and Evelyn's academic awakening, 9 powerful strategies have emerged for protecting yourself from family envy. These aren't just theories pulled from psychology textbooks. They're battle-tested approaches that have transformed real lives and real family dynamics. Let me walk you through each one, because understanding them clearly could be the difference between thriving despite family negativity and shrinking to accommodate it. The first strategy, establishing emotional detachment, asks you to become a student of your family's behavior rather than a victim of it. When your brother dismisses your promotion as luck, or your sister rolls her eyes at your achievements, you learn to see these reactions as information about their internal struggles, not truth about your worth. Harper mastered this when she stopped defending her culinary innovations and started understanding Axel's fear of being left behind. This doesn't mean becoming cold or uncaring. It means developing the wisdom to separate their emotions from your reality. Creating professional and personal boundaries forms the second pillar of protection. This might look like Harper's formal menu meetings or Samuel's decision to schedule family visits in advance. You're not punishing anyone. You're creating structure that prevents resentment from poisoning every interaction. Clear boundaries actually preserve relationships by removing the constant friction that builds when roles and expectations remain undefined. The third strategy involves seeking external validation and support, finding your people outside the family system. Harper discovered this in her chef's collective, Samuel in his hiking group and coffee shop community, and Evelyn in her philosophy club. These aren't replacements for family love, but sources of recognition and celebration that family members, caught in their own struggles, cannot provide. You need people who see your success as inspiration rather than threat. Limiting access to private spaces, our fourth strategy, recognizes that family members struggling with envy often cannot handle unrestricted access to your life. Samuel's decision to change his locks and meet family in neutral locations wasn't cruel, it was protective. Your personal spaces should feel like sanctuaries, not battlegrounds. Sometimes love means controlling when and where interactions happen. The fifth approach teaches you to redirect conversations away from toxic comparison territory. When family gatherings turn into subtle competitions or criticism sessions, you learn to steer toward neutral ground, shared memories, current events, or topics that don't trigger their insecurities. This requires practice, but it's like developing a muscle that gets stronger with use. Investing in chosen relationships, the sixth strategy, acknowledges that you need celebration and support in your life, even if your biological family cannot provide it. Samuel found this with his neighbors and fellow freelancers, people who understood his journey without judgment. Building these connections isn't betraying your family. It's honoring your own need for authentic relationships where you can be fully yourself. The seventh strategy, reframing family narratives, might be the most powerful of all. Evelyn mastered this by refusing to accept her family's story that education meant abandonment. Instead, she created her own narrative where growth was expansion, not rejection. You get to decide what your success means, regardless of how others interpret it. Practicing selective disclosure, strategy 8, means protecting your joy by sharing it only with those who can hold it gently. This isn't lying or hiding, it's wisdom. Evelyn learned to talk about campus life without mentioning the philosophical insights that transported her, preserving those sacred moments for people who could appreciate them. Finally, cultivating self-compassion provides the foundation for all other strategies. This means treating yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a good friend facing similar challenges. It means understanding that family envy reflects their limitations, not your failings. Evelyn's counseling and mindfulness work helped her hold both grief for the family closeness she'd imagined and joy for the life she was building. These 9 strategies work together like instruments in an orchestra, creating harmony even when individual family members cannot. They allow you to love your family without being limited by their fears, to maintain connections without sacrificing your growth, to honor where you came from while embracing where you're going. But here's what I want you to think about as we close. Which of these strategies resonates most deeply with your current situation? Are you like Harper, needing emotional detachment in a shared workspace? Like Samuel, requiring physical boundaries to protect your personal space? Or like Evelyn, working to reframe the entire narrative of your growth? Perhaps you need elements from all 3 approaches. The most important question isn't whether your family will change, it's whether you will. Will you continue dimming your light to make others comfortable, or will you learn to shine while creating space for everyone? To grow? Will you keep seeking validation from those who cannot give it, or will you build relationships that celebrate rather than tolerate your success? Your family's envy is not a verdict on your worth. It's information about their struggle. Their limitations are not your limitations. Their fears do not define your future. You have the power to transform these dynamics, not by changing them, but by changing how you respond to them. The courage to protect your peace while preserving love where possible is perhaps the greatest gift you can give both yourself and your family. If these stories and strategies have sparked something in you, if you see a path forward that honors both your growth and your relationships, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more wisdom on navigating life's complex dynamics with grace and strength.